All right, folks. Welcome to another free real estate advice Friday. Going to try and keep this pretty brief. Just a couple quick things I want to touch on. Thanks again for everyone that's recently been subscribing. Subscriptions are way up, and I really, really appreciate that. As always, if you have any sort of real estate questions while I'm here talking, please feel free to put it in the comments on whatever platform you're on, and I will see it, and hopefully I can give you an answer. Another quick thing, as I always mention, if you are a local business or you have an online business or you know someone that has a small business, always looking for people to come onto the podcast and do an interview with me. Last week for the podcast, we interviewed a agent from Texas named Jody Garcia. Jody's a great agent. She's in one of my coaching groups. And, it was a really great conversation because the market is so different in Texas. So I just thought it would be interesting to kind of give people context about what's going on here in New Jersey. And but any sort of business does not have to be real estate related. I'm always happy to just highlight local businesses and get the word out there. We have a pretty good reach within the local communities. So if you have someone that's looking to promote something, I am more than happy to have them on, and they can discuss their business for 10 minutes, and then we'll move on. But yeah, if you know anyone, please send them my way, and I'll be happy to book them. And then earlier this week, I was a guest on another podcast with Dassett Home Inspections. It's called The House Doctor at Dassett. And we discussed a lot of things about this market and the skill-based market that I've mentioned many times over the past year, really, of, just being really careful who you're working with, because in this market, it's really hard to navigate without someone who has a very high skill set within real estate. I always just kind of point out to people, unfortunately, for better or for worse, it's not hard to become a realtor. But it is hard to stay a successful realtor. And it's a combination of many things. There are a lot of part-timers in this field. There are a lot of people that have done it for many years, but they just don't do that much. And if you're not actively involved in this market, it's a bit of a handicap because you just don't know how things have changed in terms of, submitting offers and competitive multiple offer situations and all these different things that we have to think about on a daily basis. You have to understand that a lot of realtors, like myself, are participating in like constant education and, mastermind sessions of how you can be successful in this market. And if your agent is not participating in those things, it's really hard to kind of stay in the loop. So it's just something to think about. I've been really kind of lately doing my best to kind of get the message out there to consumers about the stuff that we know about on a day-to-day basis, that kind of the stressors for real estate agents in terms of there's so much that goes on in the background. Real estate transactions are incredibly complex, and I think people think they're very easy for the most part. But we have to know so much about, we have to know a little bit about so many things. And that's it's a lot of hard work to just kind of keep on top of those things. So, if you're considering an agent, you should at least just do diligence and making sure that you know why you've selected that agent, not just because they're a friend or they were referred by a friend who's only purchased one house ever, or whatever the case may be. So we'll continue to kind of have those conversations because I do think it's important. But I think it's a little bit of a confusing landscape out there right now for the consumer, because there are just so many aspects to real estate that just aren't, they're not reported. They're not that interesting, quite frankly. So, it's just, those are the questions I really love to answer. I get to have a lot of conversations with consumers about real estate where they're asking me questions, and I get to give them a very, big answer to what they thought was a very simple question. And I can always see that look on people's face of like, that's really interesting. I never thought about any of those elements. And that's actually honestly one of the pleasures of my job. I do love sharing that information, and everyone has like a baseline interest in real estate, right? Like that's something that just, the masses, I'm telling you from experience of how many people just ask me real estate questions that are fascinated by like what I do on a day-to-day basis. And it's hard to break through that shell of understanding what the consumer should be thinking about. And as they get deeper into the process, they start to realize that. But when you're first starting the process, some of those things just aren't all that obvious. So I'll continue to try and get those messages out there. I do put these kind of tidbits out on TikTok all the time, and then they go to Instagram and Facebook as well. But if you're just interested in those little types of things, then just definitely follow me on TikTok at Honored and Born Realtor. And, I think you'll find a lot of little pieces of information that easily digestible that, are probably things that you don't necessarily think about. So a couple things I wanted to talk about real quick. Number one, and these are things that I talked about previously on the Dassett podcast that I was on this week, but also just been talking about a lot lately, because I think these are the two things that have come up the most in recent weeks. So two things I want to talk about. Number one is the interest rates. So interest rates did take a bit of a dip this week. We're seeing about 6.85 on average on 30-year conventional mortgages, which is down a little bit. It was really hovering right around 7%. It's a little bit of a dip. It's nothing major. Teamed up with the fact that, and almost definitely directly linked to the fact that the recent inflation reports and financial outlooks are actually looking pretty positive. So, one thing I'm going to continue to kind of drill into people is, let's assume we've been saying this since basically the winter, that we are expecting interest rates to go down. It's starting to happen a little bit. And, again, that doesn't mean it's going to be a direct slope down. It's going to be this little, you'll see little blips that go up and then it starts to kind of trend downwards. I think it's actually happening a little later than we thought, but I do think that we will start to see it, especially if the economic reports continue to be positive. So, my thing to consumers is, one thing to consider is you may have a number in your head. You may say, when interest rates get down to 5%, we're going to take this a little more seriously. And I get that. It's a financial consideration. And, like 1.5 in an interest rate, or in this case, like 1.8% on interest rate, it's going to have a big effect on your monthly payment and your spending power, because your spending power is based off of your monthly payment qualification. You can make the choice to say, I'm going to wait until interest rates are 5%, which, by the way, is going to be a very long time. Or once you hear that things are moving in the right direction, you can say, all right, it's time to really start getting serious about this. And the reason I say that is really twofold, and it's pretty quite simple. Number one is, if you're going to hold a 30-year mortgage, unless you're one of those people that locked in something at 2.5%, you're almost definitely going to refinance over the course of the 30 years, probably multiple times. Maybe, you're going to get home equity loans. There's going to be many moves with that 30-year mortgage, right? You're not going to just hang on to that thing for 30 years, unless you're, part of the lucky, group of people that locked in those 2.5% and 3% mortgages. I do think our inventory situation is directly related to all those mortgages that were locked in at 2.5% to 3%, because people they don't want to lose that. If they upgrade or downgrade, I think the thought process of a lot of potential sellers is like, look, I could upgrade or downgrade, but my payment is going to blow up. And the need to upgrade or downgrade is, pales in comparison to the financial impact of getting out of a 2.5% or 3% mortgage and getting into a 6.8% mortgage. It's a massive difference in your monthly payment. But that being said, you always have this chance to refinance. So, we can't say this definitively because I don't have a crystal ball, but, historically speaking, it's darn near a certainty, right, that eventually the interest rates are going to go down, and then you have that chance to refinance. And when you do refinance, you can make other decisions, like, maybe you want to pull some equity out of the house, or, if the payment alone is, your primary consideration, then, you can try to restructure the payment, or convert to a 15-year mortgage. I mean, I think that's one of my, mid to short-term goals is to convert from my 30-year mortgage to a 15-year mortgage. You're gonna probably do that if you're holding that 30-year mortgage. So always think, like, this is not, getting a house at 6.8% is not an ideal scenario. And I think people in the past always looked at this a little bit differently, in that the interest rate is this today, it's whatever, but eventually it's going to be this. And then whenever that, opportunity comes along, it could be in 6 months. I think technically you have to make 6 payments. So let's say 6 months to 3 years. Sometime in that time period, you're going to refinance and lock in a lower rate. which is going to have significant impact on your monthly payment. And you still got the house you wanted, right? Because you didn't wait till the market was down there. So that brings me to my second point is, there are some number of people out there that are literally just waiting for interest rates to come down. So, let's say that's, of all the potential buyers out there, there's, let's say in Hunterdon County, there's, 40,000 potential buyers over the next 2 years. And, let's say, again, completely arbitrary numbers, but let's say 30% of them have in the back of their mind, I'm going to hold off. I'm going to hold off because, we can deal with this for the next, 6 months to 2 or 3 years, because the interest rates are so high. I'm just going to hold off. And each of those people has a number, right? They're going to say, 5% or 4% or whatever the number is. I will tell you, as I've continuously said, is, if that number is 3%, you can pretty much forget about it. That most likely, if it ever happens again, it's going to be a very long time. But let's say your number is something a little more reasonable, like 5.5%. You're going to wait until it's 5.5%. Well, if we hit that number, there's a lot of people that are coming with you. So the market, as bad as it is right now, if you wait until everyone is comfortable with interest rates, you're going to be in competition with all of them. So my thing is, when you hear that interest rates are starting to trend in the right direction, that's when your ears should really perk up and you should really start to consider getting a little more serious about the process, because that's telling you that at some point soon, there's going to be more buyers because they're going to be more confident. There is generally a inventory increase when interest rates go down because sellers have these same thoughts. But the main difference is, there's a lag there, right? So, the day it's announced that rates are at 5%, or 5%, the day it's announced rates are at 5%, and you're already in the process and you say, all right, great, 5%, let's go. Let's get serious about this. You're going to be able to lock in that rate within like 30 days. If you're a seller, that may be an indicator to you that it's time to start getting serious about selling your house. But then there's the wind up, right? To actually selling your house. It's going to take a little while. So, it's going to take a few months before all of those sellers start hitting the market, because that process just takes longer. It's a lot easier to, for all intents and purposes, a lot easier and a lot quicker to buy a house than to sell a house. So, all considerations around interest rate, I really do think we're headed in a positive direction, but we'll see. If I had that ability to, forecast that, then, I wouldn't have to sell houses or do podcasts. I'd just be wealthy. So, but something worth keeping an eye on. Along the same lines, I talked a little bit about on both TikTok and the podcast I was on earlier this week about pricing. So here's the thing that I'm seeing, and I'll give you a little anecdotal evidence of what I'm seeing on the market as far as pricing goes. We're going to go through a period at some point. There's going to be a bit of a shift in the market in terms of pricing. So, and this is bound to happen because we just went through this period where, I think everyone knows at this point, sellers were just getting, in most cases, even where we thought a house was going to do excellent, it just does better. And in most cases where we thought a house was going to kind of be, a dog and just kind of stay on the market and it's got issues and everything, and those houses are doing really well. So, we're going through this period where everyone's kind of getting more than they expected for the most part. With, if that person has a shred of reasonable thought, I think for the most part, the vast majority of my sellers are pleasantly surprised with the numbers they get on their house, even if they were expecting positive outcomes. But if this market starts to shift in the other direction, and let's say it shifts even a little bit towards being more of a buyer's market, we're going to have a little bit of a situation with getting sellers to understand pricing. So, the pricing process is a complicated one, and especially out here in Hunterdon County, where we don't always have a ton of comps. Like if you have, a house with, just taking one of many examples in Hunterdon County, but if you look at a house in Pittstown with 7 acres, so most houses in the area that you're going to be comparing to don't have 7 acres. There's a few, But if you look at, Pittstown doesn't have a ton of sales. So if you look at houses with 7 acres that have sold in the past 12 months, which we try not to ever go past that. We even try to keep it within 6 months. But if you look at the houses with 7 acres that are, 4-bedroom colonials that sold in Pittstown in the past 12 months, there's only going to be a few. And then you pull up those few and you're like, these houses are nothing like the house that I'm trying to sell. So right off the bat, you have this disadvantage of pricing. And I think what you're going to see is in these situations, particularly here in Hunter County, is that sellers their tendency is that they've already kind of crafted a number in their head, whether they realize it or not. And then when I run those comps and then I say, well, our comps aren't great. So we're going to have to make some assumptions here and take a lot of best guesses at pricing based off of what we have, which is very limited data. The seller tendency is always to go higher. The agent tendency is always to go lower. Now, the easy rebuttal to this that I hear in most public forums is that, well, yeah, because you just want the sale. No, that's not it. It's a market dependent decision when we decide to do that. And the reason we're doing that is because we're just trying to get as much traffic as possible into that house. I posted a video on TikTok this week of saying, you have to understand as a seller that, if you have buyers out there, let's take a very popular price point. You have a buyer out there at $500,000. That's their budget. They can spend $500,000, and they see your house hit the market for $525,000, and they say, "That's it's listed at $525,000. I know it's going to go over asking, so it's probably going to be $550,000, $560,000. We can't. We're at $500,000. We can't do $560,000. So let's not even bother with that one." That happens all the time. That is, I know because I'm talking to my buyers too. And they're like, it's not going to happen. But here's the other side of that is, let's look at it from the seller perspective, right? The reason they price at $525,000 is because they just don't. It's a little scary to put it up for $500,000 and expect to get $525,000. And I always tell them, look, I can't promise you're going to get $525,000. But if you want $525,000, I can tell you that the best chance you have at getting that is pricing it competitively and getting people in here and having them look around and feel the house and fall in love with it. And then they can say, I know we were at $500,000, but all right, we can scrape together an extra $25,000 because that's generally, you're talking about, 0.5% of the sale price. They can scrounge that up. I'm not trying to say that 20 or 25 grand is not a lot of money. It definitely is. But you're talking about it over in the context of a 30-year mortgage, right? So, and we have this conversation all the time with buyers too, is like, and these numbers change obviously by interest rate, but in any given time I can say, hey, I know you had said $500,000 is your budget. And usually it's not a qualification issue. Usually they're qualified for more. But when they look at that and I say, hey, look, just keep in mind that the difference between putting in an offer for this house for $500,000 and $525,000 is about $75 a month or $120 a month or whatever it is, again, based on interest rate. In other words, it's a manageable amount of money. It's like one bill. It's like your internet bill costs that much. Maybe get, a few less coffees, throughout the month. You can save that money pretty quick, right? And when you put it to people in that context, they'll get there. But if they see it at $525 and assume it's going to get to $560, they're not necessarily going to get to $560. So that's why you got to be really careful with the overpricing. You look at it from all the different angles, but the other thing with sellers is, so when we go through this pricing process, and again, it's setting a price on a listing for me as a listing agent, it's difficult, right? Because I have, dueling, concerns here. Number one is I don't want to, if I haven't convinced the seller of what I just said to you, that that's a good strategy. And again, it's a market dependent strategy. 2 years from now, it might be a very different strategy because the market will have probably shifted at that point. But in this market, as we sit here today, I have the problem of trying to convince the sellers this is the right strategy. Dealing with the fear they have of saying, if we list it at 500, like what if we don't, our offer for 525 never comes in? And, on top of that, if they, the easiest thing for me to do would be to just tell them 560. And what's going to happen then, right? I'm going to get the listing because I told them a number that makes them feel good. They're going to put it on the market for 560. And a couple things are going to happen. Number one is we're probably going to get crickets as far as showing requests. Like when I list a property and I get like 35 showing requests in the first 2 days, we know we priced it correctly because the interest is there. And all those people are going to get to see our product. And hopefully one of them is, or well, many of them are going to fall in love. And that's generally what happens. When you start too high and you get 2-3 showing requests in those first few days, very often you're kind of dead in the water at that point because you had your first impression, you kind of blew it, and people saw it. It popped up in their box. They looked at the house, a nice house, overpriced, and then they moved on. They're not thinking about that house any other time. It's already been put to bed in their head that I'm not getting that house, so I'm not going to look deeper. That's the problem, and that's what you want to be most careful of. So, I've been on appointments lately where I gave a price and I ran the comps and and you have to, when we don't just run the comps, right? We also have to consider market factors. So, earlier this year when things were getting very slow, we were running comps going back 12 months when we had to, but 12 months prior to when we were running those comps, the market was way hotter and interest rates were way lower. So I'm running comps for houses that, would go for 600,000, but I have to explain to my sellers when that house went for 600,000, interest rates were like 4.5%. They're like 6.5% now. And then you kind of have to put in a multiplier in there of saying like, look, we should probably reduce this by 10 or 15% because the market's not the same it was then. You can't have a direct comp without considering the market. So when all that math gets done and we come up with a price and we discuss it, and even if I get my sellers buy-in and they say, I understand what you're saying, let's make sure the traffic's good, market was different then, let's go with your price and list it. It's still challenging. And the rebuttal I've gotten at many listing appointments is said, hey, Joe Smith, from the real estate brokerage down the street said he could just give me 560. And I said, well, what did he give you did he give you comps? Did he give you like a packet that, describing his pricing strategy or anything? No, he just told me he could get me 560. That's a problem. That person, it just wants you to sign on the dotted line. They're not giving you any sort of evidence to back up their claim. And if that's a person you just met, you're not going to just take them at their word, I wouldn't think. So there's a lot that goes into that pricing. And I think that it's really important that people keep that in mind. Now, let's look at the practical implications of this. And I have to keep reminding. So I had three homes that I put offers in the past 2 weeks. And two of the three, when I ran the comps, because I have to run the comps as a buying agent to make sure the house is going to appraise and everything. And we'll get to that in a second. But when I ran the comps, I'm like, this house is way overpriced. And I'm talking way overpriced. Now, why did that happen? It could be, I would say, probably two primary drivers, right? Either number one, the listing agent didn't do their homework. They just threw a number at it. The buyers were like, or the sellers were like, that sounds fantastic. Let's do that price. That's great. And done. They signed the listing agreement and it goes to market. Or the listing agent did do all their homework, presented a price, let's say 300,000, and the seller said, whoa, we're not signing anything unless you do 375. Now 375 is so overpriced at that point, but the listing agent unfortunately gave his opinion and the sellers didn't listen and they want to do their price, and he's not going to just turn away the business. I'm sure he's going to argue his point, but he's not going to walk out of there without signing a listing agreement because we got families to feed. So that's the challenge. That's the pulling thing. So when we see an overpriced house as buying agents, we don't assume the listing agent didn't do their homework. It could just be a difficult seller that just doesn't understand all this stuff, or listens to it and just doesn't care and says, nope, I want my 375. I'm putting it up for 375. I've been in that situation many times, and it's uncomfortable because it's not the right decision, but you're not going to argue with your clients. You're going to, there's a fine line. We have to stand our ground a little bit and say, look, in my professional opinion, that's not the right move, but you can't just ignore your clients and argue with them. So that's why a lot of houses get overpriced. So I never make an assumption of why it's overpriced, but the fact is it's overpriced. So now come to the offer process. Like in this past week, I had to put in these 2 offers. So now, if I have a client who's using a mortgage, it's incredibly tough to put the offer in because I know it's not going to appraise. So in this case, in this week, I got an FHA buyer. They're using an FHA loan. They're putting 3.5% down. There's so much strain on that appraisal because the bank is not going to just lend you money. They're going to come and appraise it, and they're going to say, "Uh-oh, this one only appraises at 300, but you're asking us to borrow $375,000." That's a problem. The house is not going to appraise, and it's going to cause a problem down the line. This is why we hear a lot about appraisal waivers and everything else. But imagine this: you waive that appraisal, and you put in for the offer 375, 3.5% down. You waive the appraisal comes back $300,000. Guess what happens now? You have to come up with $75,000 in cash. If you were putting 3.5% down, a pretty good educated guess that you don't have $75,000 sitting in the bank, and that's the problem. You will have a chance to renegotiate, but it's probably going to kill the deal. This is the primary reason why you see so many homes returning to market in this. I shouldn't say the primary because there are many reasons, and I could probably list off like a top 5 reason. But if you see a house that is available and then it's gone or it's pending on Zillow or whatever, it depends on what MLS is coming from, how that data appears. And I have to explain that to people all the time too. So it might say pending or it might say off market, or it depends on what MLS is coming from. But you see a house that's available, then it's off market, and then it's available again. There's a very good chance the reason it's available again is it didn't appraise. And then it becomes a question: is the seller going to make an adjustment? Do they now realize that they're overpriced? Probably not. They're probably just going to put it back up where it was. But in my opinion, the better situation is pricing it fairly, considering the market and your comps. How similar are those comps? When were those comps sold? What were interest rates when those comps sold? And then kind of working off of that number, and that's where it kind of becomes an art, because at that point you've run out of actual data points, and now you have to kind of put in the art part of it and come up with a price that works. Get all that traffic in the house at a fair market value. The people who have a few extra bucks to throw at it will, but at the end of the day, for better or for worse, because I realize that what I'm saying is difficult to hear for people that don't have a lot of money to throw at it, is that it's going to appraise if you do it that way, whereas if you overprice it, it's not going to appraise, and it's either just going to kill the deal and delay everything, waste everyone's time and potentially some money, or it's going to successfully close. That's the challenge of pricing in this market. But when you start overpriced, it really just kind of takes the legs out from the buyers because it's unsustainable. I could tell you that, if I tell you got a successful offer for $375,000 as a seller, when the whole time in the back of my mind, I'm like, there's no way this is appraising. And these people don't have any more money. They're putting 3.5% down. I know they don't have more money. I know that's not a good deal. Like, that's not a celebration. That's like, this is going to be a problem in a month. So, pricing continues to be difficult. I think as the market shifts, it's going to get more difficult because sellers' mindset is going to have to change from "we hold all the cards," which is what every seller has thought for the past 3 or 4 years, maybe not 4 years, 3 years, we'll say, to, okay, we're not going to get the prices we saw 12 months ago, and we have to make that adjustment. That's what's going to be interesting about pricing. So I'm starting to see it already because I think the market has softened a little bit for sellers. Not a lot, because it's the same thing I've been saying for a long time. Is if you have the nicest listing in town and it's impeccable and it's staged beautifully and the updates been well maintained, those houses are still flying off the shelf. I mean, they're getting top dollar. That's not a problem. But I mean, that's 40% of the houses that hit the market, and then the middle 20%, right, are, your standard run-of-the-mill house. Needs a little bit of repairs, a little dated in some places, probably needs some updating. Those houses are softening up a little bit for sellers, just a little bit. But there's less active buyers right now because the interest rates are higher, and even that, the active buyers have less buying power because the interest rates are higher. So naturally, it's going to soften the market a little bit. So far, over the past 2 years, it's just been offset by the fact that the inventory is so dreadfully low that people are desperate. The demand is so much higher than the supply. It's very simple, but it's softened a little bit, but it's like a nuanced point. At the end of the day, the grand scheme of things, the market is still very much in the seller's favor. So just some interesting things to think about. If you do have any questions, please feel free to post them. Again, you can post after the fact and comment on any of these when you see them later. You can put it on YouTube, whatever the case may be, wherever you're watching this, and be happy to answer those. I love getting those questions because I can use that for future episodes and give me something to talk about. As always, check me out on TikTok. All this stuff is available, in a short form, not me talking for 30 minutes, which is more desirable in my opinion. But check it out at Hunted and Born Realtor. And I hope you guys all have a great weekend. And I will see you soon. Take care.